The pen didn't feel heavy that morning, until I realized what it had signed away. My name is Evelyn Hartwell. I'm 68, a woodworker who built a company with my own hands. When my son and his wife asked me to rest, I thought it was love. But love doesn't come with a contract. I didn't know a single signature could make a mother disappear. Not from this world, but from her own name. It began long before that signature, back when the scent of cedar filled the air of our little town by the river. Hartwell Bay. That's what they call it. A place where mornings start with the sound of saws, and evenings end with the hum of boats sliding across the water. My husband built the first walls of our woodshop with his own hands. I finished them with mine. Every beam, every chair, every polished table carried the warmth of two lives that believed work was love made visible. When he passed, I kept the shop running, not because I had to, but because the silence of the machines felt like losing him all over again. I'm Evelyn Hartwell, 68 years old. People say I should slow down, but my hands still remember the rhythm of the saw, the grain of the maple, the scent of pine when it's freshly cut. That's how I talk to him now. Through wood, through patience, through the small sounds of things being rebuilt. Then Daniel came back. My only son. He returned from the city with bright suits and brighter words. Mom, this isn't just a shop, it's a brand. He said it like a compliment, but it felt like a translation I didn't need. To him, the smell of wood was nostalgia. To me, it was oxygen. He brought his wife, Melissa, polished, sharp. A woman who never had sawdust under her nails. And then my brother Bobby started showing up again. He hadn't spoken to me in years, but now he was suddenly interested in family investments. His wife Connie just smiled and said the same thing every time. Evelyn, you've worked too hard for too long. Let us take care of it. They used words like shares and potential. They called it legacy management. But somewhere in their sentences, I began to disappear. At night, I'd sit by the window, looking over the water. The woodshop lights flickered in the distance. Like a heartbeat I was afraid to lose. And I asked myself, when did love start sounding like a business meeting? There's a truth I didn't understand back then. In families like ours, where one generation gives everything, the next sometimes forgets how to give anything at all. They grow up surrounded by sacrifice, and mistake it for stability. They think comfort is a birthright, not a gift. Psychologists call it the entitlement bias. I just call it blindness. The kind that comes from never having to look down and see the hands that held you up. When Daniel talked about expanding the Hartwell brand, I heard something else entirely. He didn't want to preserve what I built. He wanted to own it. And ownership, in his world, meant erasing the person who came before. In families like ours, where one generation gives everything, the next sometimes forgets how to give anything at all. They grow up surrounded by sacrifice, and mistake it for stability. They think comfort is a birthright, not a gift. Psychologists call it the entitlement bias. I just call it blindness. The kind that comes from never having to look down and see the hands that held you up. When Daniel talked about expanding the Hartwell brand, I heard something else entirely. He didn't want to preserve what I built. He wanted to own it. And ownership, in his world, meant erasing the person who came before. I remember one morning, he found me sanding a chair leg that had cracked in the winter cold. Mom, he said, why waste time fixing what can be replaced? He smiled, but something broke quietly inside me. Because that's how it starts, not with cruelty, but with convenience, with the belief that old things, old ways, even old people can be replaced. That evening, Melissa brought over brochures, marketing plans, sponsorship offers. She called it modernizing the legacy. I looked at the photos she'd designed, glossy furniture, with the name Hartwell printed in gold across the bottom. There wasn't a single mention of the people who had built it. Not my husband. Not me. Just a logo, clean, profitable, and empty. Bobby laughed when he saw my face. Evelyn, the world doesn't run on hard work anymore. It runs on image. I didn't argue. Because you can't explain craftsmanship to people who measure everything in percentages. Later that night, I stayed in the shop long after they left. The sawdust on the floor glowed under the warm lamp, and I traced my husband's initials carved into the workbench. That was the moment I realized what was really happening. They weren't just reshaping the business. They were reshaping me, sanding away my name, my story, my worth. And I didn't even see the knife coming, because it looked like kindness. Looking back now, I wish I'd noticed the small signs sooner. The way Daniel stopped calling me Mom and started calling me Evelyn during meetings. The way Melissa began answering questions meant for me. The way Bobby referred to my workshop as our facility. Each moment was a tiny cut, easy to ignore until you realize you're bleeding. But that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't come wearing a mask. It comes smiling, with a cup of coffee and a clipboard, saying, "We just want to help." I thought I was shaping wood. I didn't know they were shaping a plan. And soon, they would carve me out completely, one signature at a time. Dinner that night felt different. The light above the table was too bright, the kind that exposes every wrinkle and thought you try to hide. Daniel had made a reservation at a small restaurant overlooking the bay. He said it was a family dinner, the kind we hadn't had in months. But from the moment we sat down, I knew it wasn't about family. It was about business. He waited until the waitress walked away before clearing his throat. "Mom," he said, folding his napkin carefully, "we have good news. Grant & Company wants to buy 51% of the Hartwell brand. It's a huge opportunity. They'll handle production, expansion, marketing, everything." I stared at him, thinking I'd misheard. 51%. I repeated. He nodded. "That means they'll own it," I said quietly. "Not us." Melissa reached across the table and touched my hand. Her nails were perfect, her smile rehearsed. "Evelyn, it's not ownership. It's partnership. You'll still have a say. But you've been doing this for decades. You deserve to rest." Bobby leaned back in his chair, sipping his wine. "Come on, Ev. You've done the hard part. Let the next generation take it from here." The next generation. That's what they called themselves now, like I was already gone. I could feel the room shrinking. The sound of the waves outside seemed far away. "Your father built this with his hands," I said. "He didn't do it for investors. He did it for us." Daniel smiled the way people do when they think they're being patient. "Dad was a good man," he said. "But times change. We can't survive on nostalgia. People buy stories now, not sawdust." I wanted to speak, but Melissa's voice cut in. Soft but sharp. "Evelyn, we've all noticed you've been forgetful lately. Losing track of meetings, repeating yourself. It's understandable at your age." Her words hit me harder than any slap. "Age. Forgetful. I was 68, not invisible." Daniel looked away as if embarrassed. "Mom, no one's saying you can't be involved. Just let us handle the paperwork. You'll still get dividends, of course." Dividends? That's what my life's work had become, numbers on a statement. I put down my fork. The food on my plate had gone cold. "Do you hear yourselves?" I asked. "You talk about this place like it's a product. But it's not just wood and profit margins. It's who we are." Bobby chuckled, trying to lighten the air. "You're too sentimental. That's your problem, Ev. Business doesn't care about feelings. I looked at him and said, then maybe business has no soul. No one spoke for a long time. The sound of the waves filled the silence. Finally, Daniel broke it. Mom, we've already drafted the agreement. We'll need your signature by the end of the week. I felt my hands trembling, so I folded them in my lap. He reached across the table, his expression carefully measured. It's for the best, he said. You can trust us. And in that moment, I realized something I never thought I'd have to admit out loud. I didn't. The waitress came back with dessert, her smile unaware of what had just broken between us. Chocolate mousse, Daniel's favorite. The same dessert I used to make for him on his birthdays when he was little. He used to blow out the candles and whisper, "Thank you, Mom." Now he couldn't even look me in the eye. As they left the table, laughing about projections and market shares, I stayed behind for a moment. Their voices faded, but their words lingered. Forgetful, old-fashioned, outdated. I touched the rim of my glass, still trembling. That night, walking back to the shop, I could still hear Daniel's voice echoing in my head. It's for the best. You can trust us. People think betrayal comes from hate. But it doesn't. It comes wrapped in good intentions, served over dinner, spoken with a smile. Sometimes, it sounds like love trying to help you, until you realize it's just love turning into ambition. That afternoon, the rain came early. I remember because the sound of it, on the tin roof of the workshop, made everything else quiet. I went inside to get my coat before heading home, and that's when I heard them, Daniel and Bobby, in the office, behind the half-closed door. At first, I didn't mean to listen. But then I heard my name. "She's not going to sign," Daniel said, his voice low but certain. Bobby laughed. "Then we'll make her. We've got the paperwork. The doctor already signed off on her evaluation. One more slip, and she's legally incompetent." There was a silence so long I thought the rain had stopped. Then Daniel's voice again, colder, flatter. "It's not like she'll even understand what's happening. We'll keep her comfortable. She'll still get her check." My hand froze on the doorknob. For a moment. I couldn't tell if I was shaking from anger or from the chill crawling up my spine. They weren't strangers talking about a client. They were my own blood talking about me. I pressed my back against the wall, listening to the sound of their pens scratching paper. Bobby said, "You sure you can live with this?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "It's not personal. It's business. She built something great, but it's time to move forward. Not personal." Those were the same words his father once used when letting workers go during a bad year, but he had cried after. Daniel didn't sound like that. He sounded proud. I looked at my trembling hands and realized the cruelest part. I had raised him to be confident, decisive, capable of leading. And now, he was using all those lessons against me. I wanted to burst in, to shout, "How dare you!" but the words caught in my throat. I stayed hidden, staring at the wood grain of the door, remembering the years I'd spent sanding, carving, smoothing every imperfection out of the boards. It hit me then my own son was sanding me down the same way, turning me into something quiet, polished, and harmless. Their conversation went on. Melissa's name came up. "She'll handle the PR," Daniel said. "We'll frame it as Mom stepping back due to health reasons. Investors love that narrative. Health reasons. That's what they would call betrayal now." I stepped back slowly, afraid the floorboards would creak. The rain outside had turned heavier, blurring the windows. For a second, I saw my reflection in the glass, pale, small, tired. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. When I finally slipped out, I didn't take my coat. I just walked through the drizzle, past the workshop, down toward the docks, where my husband and I used to sit after long days. The air smelled of wet pine and river silt. It used to bring me peace. Now it burned my throat. I kept hearing their words: doctor's evaluation, legally incompetent, she'll still get her check. Each phrase like a hammer striking the same spot in my chest. People say blood is thicker than water. But they never mention what happens when blood turns cold. It doesn't flow. It freezes. And when it freezes, it cuts sharper than glass. I sat on the old bench by the water until my hands stopped shaking. Not because the pain was gone, because I had decided something. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. I wanted to see how far they would go. How deep their greed would dig before it buried them. That night, when I returned home, the house felt different. Every photo on the wall, every piece of furniture I had built with my husband's hands, felt like evidence of a crime I hadn't committed, but would have to prove I didn't. I poured myself a cup of tea. It tasted like dust. Then I whispered to the empty kitchen, they think I'm losing my mind. Maybe it's time to let them believe it. But before that plan ever formed fully, I sat there for a long time, just an old mother in the dark, realizing that love, once betrayed, doesn't die with noise. It dies quietly, behind closed doors, in the space between one heartbeat and the next. And in that silence, I made myself a promise: if they wanted me gone, they'd have to erase every memory I'd built into this wood, every piece of my name carved into this town. And I would not go quietly. The next morning, I looked in the mirror, and almost didn't recognize myself. Not because of age. But because I saw a woman who had finally stopped waiting to be respected. If they thought I was losing my mind, then maybe that's what I'd give them. Piece by piece. The first day, I forgot my keys. I left them in the fridge. Melissa laughed gently and said, "Oh, Evelyn, you really should rest more." I smiled back, just as gently. Maybe you're right. The next week, during a meeting about the new investors, I called one of the board members by the wrong name. Twice. I saw Daniel exchange a look with Melissa, a silent spark of victory between them. They didn't know I saw it. They never imagine mothers are still watching, even when they seem confused. At night, I'd sit in the quiet of the woodshop, the machines asleep, the smell of sawdust and varnish still hanging in the air. That's where I kept the small recorder hidden under the workbench. One of the old models my husband used when documenting his designs. Every word they spoke to me, every whisper that hinted at manipulation, I captured it. Truth, saved in tiny pieces of sound. I wasn't alone, either. There was Mara Collins, the woman who lived 2 houses down by the river. A nurse for 30 years. And a mother who had buried her only son before he turned 12. She came over that night after I called her. When I told her everything, about the signatures, the forged papers, the plan to declare me incompetent, she didn't look shocked. She just poured tea, nodded once, and said, "I've seen people fake death to survive. You can fake weakness too." Her calmness steadied me. "I'm not an actress, Mara," I told her. She smiled. "You don't have to be. Just stop proving them wrong. Let them prove themselves." It was the smartest sentence I'd heard in years. We began to plan quietly. She taught me how to mimic the small signs: forgetting what day it was, asking the same question twice, misplacing tools in the wrong drawers. I hated every second of it. But I learned quickly that the only way to fight people who see you as fragile is to become the fragility they underestimate. Melissa fell for it first. During one meeting, I paused mid-sentence and stared at the blueprint on the table. For 10 long seconds, I didn't move. Daniel leaned in. Mom, are you okay? Blinked. This isn't my handwriting, I said quietly, even though I knew it was. Melissa's eyes lit up. Maybe it's time to slow down, Evelyn. These details are getting complicated. That evening, I heard her whisper to Daniel in the hallway, she's slipping. We can file the medical affidavit soon. Her voice trembled with excitement. They thought it was victory. But to me, it was evidence. Every conversation, every word of pity, every fake smile, I recorded them all. Sometimes my hands shook so badly, I had to steady the recorder against the table. Not from fear, from anger. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was calculation. Mara helped me back up the files, encrypt them, and store copies in her clinic. She said, "You can't fight power with rage. You fight it with proof." I nodded, but inside, I felt something breaking. Because pretending to forget meant living inside a lie. It meant letting my son call me confused, fragile, tired. It meant watching him treat me like a child, without screaming the truth in his face. But I kept going. Each small act of humiliation became fuel. Each fake mistake brought me closer to the day I would stop pretending. One night, Mara stayed late, sorting through the files with me. The light flickered in the kitchen, casting shadows across the table. She looked at me and said quietly, "I lost my son because I couldn't protect him. Don't lose yours because you're too proud to fight back." Her words stayed with me. I realized that justice doesn't always come with noise or fire. Sometimes, it wears the face of a tired old woman, pretending she can't remember what day it is, while secretly remembering every cruel thing ever said to her. The next morning, Melissa found me staring out the window at the river. She placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Evelyn. We'll handle everything." I looked at her reflection in the glass and smiled faintly. "I know you will," I said. She didn't realize the recorder was on, tucked beneath the folds of my shawl. It caught everything, her tone, her words, the soft click of manipulation she'd mistaken for kindness. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "They believe I am fading. But the truth is, I have never seen more clearly. Late. Justice, I learned, sometimes begins with silence. And silence, in the right hands, is louder than any scream." The morning light cut through the curtains, cold and sharp. On the table between us lay a pile of papers, medical forms, prescriptions, lab results. All false, all necessary. Mara adjusted her glasses and sighed. "It has to look official, Evelyn. The date, the hospital name, the doctor's signature. Everything." I nodded. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from what I was about to become, a woman with a disease that didn't exist. It took days to build the file. Mara used old hospital templates, scanned, edited, layered with just enough imperfection to seem real. The report read: early onset Alzheimer's, cognitive decline suspected. Recommendation: guardianship and financial oversight. When I saw my name printed beside that diagnosis, my throat tightened. That night, I stared at it for hours. It felt like an obituary for the woman I used to be. The next morning, Mara said, "Once they see this, they'll move fast. They'll think they're in control. That's when we record everything." She was right. By noon, Daniel called. His voice was soft, careful, almost sweet. "Mom, we think it's best if we take care of things for you. The stress isn't good." I played my part. "Of course, dear. I know my memory's been slipping." He hesitated, surprised by my compliance. "I'm glad you understand." When he hung up, I turned to Mara. He believed it. She didn't smile. "That's the easy part. The hard part is watching it happen." Within a week, Melissa arrived with folders and smiles. "We've already spoken to the lawyers," she said, her voice sugar smooth. "It's just a formality, Mom." I signed the papers slowly, my hand shaking just enough. Inside, I counted every heartbeat, every word. Another recording clicked on in my pocket. Each lie became evidence. Each act of kindness they offered me turned into a blade. But at night, when the house went quiet, the plan felt heavier than I could bear. I sat by the window, looking out toward the river. The moonlight reflected on the water, just like the nights my husband and I would walk there after closing the workshop. He'd say, "Wood doesn't lie, Evie. If there's a crack, it'll show." "It always does." And I whispered back to him now, "Then let their cracks show too." Still, there were moments of doubt, when I heard Daniel laugh with his kids, or saw Melissa helping them with their coats. Something inside me softened. I asked myself, was I becoming like them? Manipulating for a cause I called justice? But the answer came quietly, no. I was protecting what they had forgotten how to love. Mara noticed my hesitation. That evening, while sealing the envelope with the fake test results, she said softly, "If they find out, your son could be charged with fraud, conspiracy, everything." I looked at her and said, "I'm not doing this to destroy him. I just want him to remember who he used to be." She held my hand, her eyes tired but kind. "You still call him your son. That's why you'll win." The next day, the performance continued. I misplaced my glasses on purpose, forgot my doctor's name, called the neighbor by the wrong title. Melissa's texts came faster. "She's declining quicker than we thought." Daniel scheduled an evaluation. Mara arranged for a friend, a retired psychiatrist, to play the part. The exam took place in my living room. Daniel hovered, pretending to be concerned. When the doctor asked me who the president was, I smiled faintly. I forget names these days. But I remember when people used to mean what they said. Daniel laughed awkwardly, thinking it was confusion. Mara, behind him, met my eyes. She knew. When the man left, Daniel hugged me. "You don't need to worry about anything anymore, Mom. We'll handle it all." His voice cracked slightly, and for a split second, I saw my little boy again, the one who once built birdhouses beside me. It almost broke me that night. I couldn't sleep. I called Mara. What if he never learns? What if I'm just teaching him to be cruel in another way? She paused, then said, "Sometimes love isn't about stopping someone from falling. It's letting them hit the ground softly enough to feel the pain." I held the phone against my chest and cried quietly, so the walls wouldn't hear. By morning, the trap was complete. Every signature, every whisper, every patronizing smile, they had documented it all themselves. The file was ready, and so was I. As I closed the folder, I said out loud, "They invented a disease to erase me. But they'll soon learn truth has a memory of its own." The courthouse was full that morning. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras flashing like restless fireflies. The sign outside read "Town of Hartwell Bay, Civil Hearing," but inside, it felt like Judgment Day. Daniel sat at the front with his lawyer. Melissa beside him, chin high, wearing the same red lipstick she always used when she wanted to look powerful. Across the aisle, Bobby avoided my gaze, staring at the floor like it might swallow him whole. I sat quietly, my shawl wrapped around my shoulders, the deep red one my husband had given me years ago, the color of dignity and warning. To them, I looked small, frail, finished. That was the last illusion I would allow. The judge called the session to order. Daniel's lawyer began. "Your Honor, this case is about protecting a vulnerable elder. Mrs. Evelyn Hartwell is suffering from early-stage Alzheimer's. We have medical documents, financial inconsistencies, and witness statements proving she's unfit to oversee the Hartwell brand." Each word struck like a hammer. I stayed still, breathing slow, as the whispers rippled through the crowd. When he finished, Daniel leaned forward, hands clasped together, pretending to be the dutiful son. For a moment I almost pitied him. Almost. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Hartwell, do you understand the charges brought against you? He stood. Slowly. My knees trembled, but my voice did not. I do, Your Honor. I just don't understand how my own children turned my love into evidence. The courtroom fell silent. I turned to Daniel. You said I needed rest, that I wasn't myself anymore. But tell me if I've lost my mind, how do I still remember everything you said behind that office door? Melissa's smile froze. Daniel blinked, uncertain. And then, from the back of the room, Mara stepped forward. She held up a small recorder, old, scratched, but steady. Your Honor, she said, we'd like to submit audio evidence. The clerk pressed play. My voice filled the room first, trembling but clear. Daniel, are you sure about this? Then his voice calm, cold. She won't even notice. Once the paperwork's done, she's legally out. Just make sure she doesn't sign anything strange. And then Bobby, the doctor's already signed. We can file it this week. Each word echoed through the courtroom like nails in a coffin. Melissa's face drained of color. She whispered something to Daniel, but he didn't answer. The judge raised a hand. Order. Order in this court! Exclamation, but the room had already shifted. The audience wasn't just watching a case, they were watching a reckoning. When the recording ended, I stepped forward again, unwrapping my shawl and laying it gently across the table. Its deep red color glowed under the courtroom light. If I truly suffer from memory loss, I said, then why do I remember every person who tried to erase me? No one spoke. Not even Daniel. I turned to the judge. They say I'm unfit to lead. But perhaps they're unfit to love. The judge's eyes softened. Mrs. Hartwell, we will review the evidence carefully. I nodded. Take all the time you need. I've waited long enough for truth to speak. Behind me, someone started clapping softly. One of the workers from the woodshop. Then another joined in. And another. The sound grew, quiet but firm, like the heartbeat of something that refused to die. Daniel lowered his head. Bobby wiped his face with shaking hands. Melissa turned away, her voice a faint whisper. She planned this. Yes, I did. And I had done it not out of vengeance, but because justice sometimes needs a stage before it can be believed. As the gavel struck, the judge called for recess. I stood there a moment longer, staring at the faces that once called me mothered. I didn't see enemies. I saw lost children, too blinded by greed to remember where they came from. When I left the courtroom, the light outside felt different. Mara caught up to me and said, You did it. I smiled faintly. No, I said. Truth did that day. The town of Hartwell Bay saw more than a hearing. They saw what happens when silence learns how to speak. The courtroom was still buzzing after the recording ended. Reporters whispered. Chairs creaked. The air felt heavy, like everyone was holding the same breath. That's when the door opened. A woman in a gray suit stepped in, steady and composed. She walked toward the front, her badge catching the light. Detective Nia Porter, the bailiff announced. She carried a small envelope and a chain of silver glinting between her fingers. I was assigned to verify the ownership records for Hartwell Bay Manufacturing, she said. But in the process, I found something else. Her voice was calm, professional, until she looked at me. That's when her tone faltered just a little. She handed the judge the evidence envelope. Then slowly, she held up the necklace. A tiny silver pendant, shaped like a heart split in two. One half missing. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. Because I had seen that necklace before, decades ago. It was the one I left in a baby's crib, 40 years earlier. The one I never saw again after the hospital fire. The judge frowned. Mrs. Hartwell, are you all right? He whispered. Where did you find that? Nia hesitated. It was submitted with the sealed adoption records from the Vermont Fire Recovery Project. I didn't know what it meant until now. She glanced at me, then at the pendant still resting in her palm. Her hand trembled slightly. I was told it belonged to a woman named Evelyn Hartwell, she said quietly. And that it was found next to an infant who survived. The room blurred. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, uneven, like the sound of wood being sanded too thin. Do you still have the other half? She asked. With shaking fingers, I reached under my shawl. The same silver heart hung from a chain I'd worn for 40 years, dull, but whole in memory. I lifted it into the light. The two halves matched perfectly. Someone gasped. Even Daniel turned in his seat, speechless. For a moment, time stopped. And then, in a trembling whisper, she said, Are you him? He took one step forward. My voice was barely there. I thought you died. Her eyes filled, but she didn't move. Neither did I. Because after decades of silence, love doesn't rush. It remembers. The judge cleared his throat softly. Perhaps we should take a recess. But no one left. Not yet. Nia walked closer, slow, cautious, until she was standing right in front of me. Up close I saw her mother's eyes in her face. My eyes. She reached out, hesitated, then finally took my hand. Her palm was warm. Solid. Real. And for the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't anger, or sorrow, or resolve. I felt home. I looked for you, she said. All my life. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I held them back. I never stopped looking either. Behind us, the courtroom had gone silent again. Even the judge looked away, as if giving us privacy inside that moment. Then Nia squeezed my hand. Let's finish this, she said. For both of us. I nodded. For the truth. And for the family we still have left. When we turned back toward the bench, the sunlight broke through the high window and spilled across us, mother and daughter, joined by two halves of a broken heart. That light fell on the recorder on the table, on the files that once erased my name, and on the faces of those who'd thought justice was theirs to control. It wasn't fury that filled the room anymore. It was something stronger. Something whole. Because in that moment, I understood. Justice had never been about revenge. It had been about remembrance. And sometimes, remembrance takes the shape of a silver necklace, finally made whole. When the trial was over, the courthouse emptied like a tide, pulling back from the shore. Daniel and Bobby stood by the steps, surrounded by reporters. Their faces looked smaller than I remembered, not from age, but from shame. The judge's final words echoed in my head, guilty of fraud and coercion. It was justice, yes. But not peace. That evening, I sat alone in the woodshop. The same smell of cedar and varnish filled the air. The scent of my husband's hands, the rhythm of all the years we built something from nothing. I traced my fingers along the workbench and whispered, It's over. But the truth was, it wasn't. Not really. Nia walked in quietly. She didn't knock anymore. She just entered, like she'd always belonged here. They'll both serve time, she said. You could file for restitution, you know. Recover everything they took. I looked at her, then at the sunlight falling through the old workshop window. What would I even do with all that money? I asked. Buy back my peace. She didn't answer. She just smiled softly. After a long silence, I said, Justice isn't revenge. It's reclaiming peace. She nodded. Then what will you do? I'll rebuild, I said. But not for me. For the women who were told they were too old, too tired, too invisible to start again. That night, I drafted the papers to establish the Hartwell Foundation, a scholarship and training center for single mothers, women leaving abusive homes, widows trying to learn a trade. The same hands that once built furniture would now build futures. It felt right. Not loud, not triumphant, just right. A week later, I visited the county jail. Daniel had asked to see me. He sat behind the glass, thinner, quieter. When he picked up the phone, his voice cracked. "Mom, I never thought it would go this far." I looked at him. "My son, my mistake, my love. You thought you could take everything," I said softly. "But the one thing you couldn't take was the truth." He lowered his head. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "I already did," I replied. "Forgiving you doesn't erase what you did, Daniel. It just frees me from carrying it." He looked up then, eyes red. "Why? Because hate is just another prison. And I've been behind too many walls already." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry." I smiled faintly. "Then that's the beginning of something." When I walked out, the air outside felt different, not heavy, not bitter. Just clean. Mara was waiting near the parking lot. She hugged me tightly. "You really did it, Evelyn." "No," I said. "We did." A few months later, the Hartwell workshop reopened, under a new sign: Hartwell Training Center, rebuilt by hands that remember. The machines ran again, but this time, laughter mixed with the sound of sawdust and sanding. Women stood at the benches, young, old, tired, hopeful, learning, building, healing. Nia handled the paperwork, training, and outreach. I handled the teaching. Each time I showed someone how to carve a perfect dovetail, I saw something change in them, the same quiet pride I'd once seen in my husband's eyes. One afternoon, Nia leaned on the doorway, watching the women work. "You could have chosen to destroy everything, Evelyn," she said. "But you turned it into something alive." I smiled. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past," I said. "It just breaks the chains that keep us tied to it." She nodded. "That's what freedom looks like." Outside, the sun dipped low over Hartwell Bay, throwing long golden light across the workshop floor. The same room where betrayal began had become the place where healing took root. I picked up a small wooden plaque from the bench. On it, I'd carved the words by hand: "Peace is the price of justice, and the gift of letting go." That night, I hung it on the wall, right above the old family photo. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by what was lost. I felt grateful for what had survived. That night, the workshop was silent. Only the sound of rain tapping gently on the roof kept me company. The others had gone home. Even Nia had insisted I rest. But there was one last thing I needed to do. I sat at my husband's old desk, the one with the small drawer that always stuck halfway, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The pen felt heavy in my hand, like it knew the weight of what I was about to say. I began slowly. "My dear Daniel, you are no longer the boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the backyard. You are a man now, a man who forgot what love was built from." The ink bled slightly where my hand trembled. I paused, then kept writing. I spent many nights wondering what I did wrong. I thought maybe I worked too hard, or stayed too silent, or expected too much. But now I understand, silence isn't love. And love isn't control. The rain grew heavier, and for a moment, I imagined he could hear it too, wherever he was, in that cold, gray cell. When you stood against me, I saw not my son, but a reflection of my own mistakes. I raised you to fight for success, but I forgot to teach you to kneel for forgiveness. I set the pen down and let the words sink in. Forgiveness. It had taken me years to say that word without bitterness. Then I wrote again. "I don't hate you, Daniel. I never could. But I no longer carry the pain you gave me. I've laid it down like wood that's been sanded smooth, still marked, but no longer sharped." A tear landed on the paper, blurring the word forgive. I didn't wipe it away. Some stains are meant to stay. One day, I continued, when the noise inside you finally quiets, you'll remember what love sounds like. You'll remember the way it speaks softly, not with pride, but with mercy. Outside, thunder rolled far in the distance. I thought of him sitting in that cell, angry, ashamed, maybe finally listening. I hope you learn how to love again, I wrote. Not for me, but for yourself. The world doesn't need another man who wins. It needs a man who heals. I leaned back, exhaled, and read the letter from the beginning to the end. There were no accusations. No demands, only truth. At the bottom, I signed my name, Evelyn Hartwell. Then I looked at it one last time and whispered, "You'll never read this, my son, but maybe you'll feel it." I folded the paper neatly and slipped it into the drawer, the same one that stuck. It took 2 soft pushes before it finally closed. The room felt lighter. Not empty, not lonely, just still. I stood and walked across the workshop floor. The sawdust shimmered faintly under the lamplight, like snow in summer. Before leaving, I placed my hand on the wood of the nearest table, the first one Daniel had built when he was 12. I remembered his grin when he showed it to me, his small hands covered in glue, his voice saying, "Look, Mom, it stands on its own." "Yes," I whispered, "it did." I turned off the lamp. The darkness that followed didn't feel frightening. It felt final, peaceful. Somewhere between forgiveness and memory, I had finally found rest. The letter remained in the drawer, sealed not with ink, but with grace. And even if it never reached his hands, I knew it had already reached his soul. The morning light spilled across the wooden floor of the workshop, soft and golden. The smell of cedar still lingered in the air, a scent that had followed Evelyn all her life. Nia stood near the old workbench, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. The sign above the door had been replaced, its letters freshly carved, rebuilt by hands that remember. She whispered, "It's perfect, Mrs. Hartwell. You'd like it this way." I remember that morning as if I were still there. The shavings, the dust, the hum of quiet labor, all of it had returned, but the noise of ambition was gone. Only peace remained. Nia turned to me then, her eyes soft but steady. "I'll keep this place alive," she said. "Not as a company. As a promise." I smiled. That's all I ever wanted. She had my hands, not in shape, but in purpose. Every stroke of sandpaper, every careful cut she made, carried something older than skill, remembrance. Weeks passed. The town that once pitied the old woman who lost her company, now came to learn from the women she taught. Single mothers, widows, young girls who'd been told they weren't strong enough. They all filled the workshop now. Their laughter blended with the sound of saws and planes, turning labor into harmony. Nia organized everything the way I used to. Coffee before sunrise, windows open for the morning air, soft music humming from the corner radio. But she added something new, a wall of names. Each plank bore the initials of the women who trained there. "Every mark deserves to be remembered," she said. One afternoon, she found the letter in the drawer, the one I'd written to Daniel. She didn't open it. She just held it, nodded, and placed it inside a wooden box. Next to it, she placed her own letter, one that began, "To the mother I found late, but never too late." That day, she called the women together. They gathered around the main table, the same one Daniel built when he was 12. It still stood strong. Nia spoke softly, her voice carrying through the smell of oak and varnished. "This workshop isn't just about wood. It's about memory. It's about healing what others tried to break." She lifted her hand and ran it over the sign again. "Rebuilt by hands that remember, hers, mine, and yours." The women clapped, some cried. And I swear, if spirits can breathe, I breathed then. That night, the workshop glowed. Candles flickered in the windows, like small stars trapped in glass. The laughter inside reminded me of the home I once had, before ambition, before betrayal, before silence. Nia looked up at the photograph hanging near the door, me, in my younger years, covered in sawdust, smiling like I owned the world. She smiled back. "You still do." When she turned off the lights, the reflection in the glass lingered a second longer than it should have. Maybe just the moonlight, or maybe not. And as the night settled over Hartwell Bay, the sound of the tide touched the old boards of the dock. Peace had finally come, not through victory, but through continuation. Justice had ended in forgiveness. Legacy had turned into renewal. And the workshop, the one they tried to take, lived again, carried forward by a daughter who once was lost, but now was homed, rebuilt by hands that remember, and by hearts that refuse to forget. The evening air was thick with salt and sawdust. I walked slowly toward the dock, the same wooden path I'd crossed 1,000 times before. The tide whispered below me, calm and steady, as if the bay itself remembered every secret I had ever kept. I stopped halfway and turned back toward the workshop. The lights inside were still glowing, faint, warm, alive. Nia and the others were probably still sanding, laughing, maybe arguing about the right way to polish a beam. The sound carried faintly through the air, and for a moment, I felt the world breathe again. Justice, I realized, had never been about punishment. It wasn't the hammer in the courtroom, or the papers that bore our names. It was the quiet decision to stand when everyone expected us to fall. People often ask what it feels like to lose everything. The truth is, you don't lose it all at once. You lose it in pieces, trust first, then pride, then the comfort of believing your family would never hurt you. But you gain something too. You gain the courage to look at yourself and still say, "I'm still here." That's what justice truly is. Not revenge, not victory. It's presence. It's surviving what was meant to erase you. I looked down at my hands. The lines were deeper now, filled with dust and time, but they still remembered how to build. Every plank I ever touched carried a memory. My husband's laughter, Daniel's first carving, Nia's steady hands sanding the edges smooth. Sawdust still clung to my sleeves like snow, soft and stubborn, refusing to disappear. Maybe that's what I had become too, a quiet echo that refused to vanish. I took a breath. The air smelled of pine and ocean, sharp and kind at the same time. And I thought, no one can take the dignity of a mother unless she decides to let it go. I had been betrayed, forgotten, even declared unfit to remember. But I never let them take my voice. Not the soft one that forgives. Not the steady one that endures. Not the one that says, "I am still standing." Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang, the evening signal from the shipyard. Its sound echoed across the water, deep and certain. For a second, it felt like the heartbeat of the town itself. I smiled. Hartwell Bay had changed, and so had I. Once, I thought legacy was what we left behind. Now, I see it's what continues to move through the hands that follow. Through Nia's voice teaching others. Through every nail, every beam, every scarred. Justice doesn't live in the courtroom. It lives in the quiet moments after, when the world forgets your pain, but you choose to remember your strength. I placed my hand on the railing of the dock. The wood was rough and familiar, just like life, marked, imperfect, but still holding strong. I whispered to the wind they tried to erase me. But I'm still here, and I remember. The bay answered with a soft wave against the posts, as if agreeing. And for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace, not because everything was fixed, but because I no longer needed it to be. The sawdust in the air shimmered in the dying light, drifting upward instead of down. Echoes of every story, every touch, every forgiveness, all rising, quietly, into the evening sky. If you have ever been silenced, if you have ever been told that your voice was too small, too late, or too inconvenient, then this story is for you. Maybe you were the one who kept a family together, while others took credit. Maybe you stayed quiet, thinking silence was the only way to keep the peace. Maybe you trusted too much, and it cost you everything. But hear me now, silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's just the pause before strength finds its way to speak. If Evelyn's story moved something in you, if it reminded you of your mother, your grandmother, or maybe even yourself, don't let it end here. Share it. Because every time one person dares to share a story like this, another woman somewhere realizes she's not alone. Justice doesn't always come with noise or applause. Sometimes it starts with one person whispering, "I remember." And that whisper becomes an echo strong enough to shake a world that tried to forget us. So, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased, stand with us. Write in the comments what part of this story stayed with you. Tell us where you're listening from. Because stories like Evelyn's don't just belong to one woman. They belong to every heart that ever fought quietly for dignity. And if you believe that even the smallest voice can change something, then help that voice travel. Click share. Let it find the next person who needs to hear it tonight. Sometimes, justice begins with a whisper. And sometimes, that whisper is yours. Family shadows. Stories that remember.